Welcome to the Compliance Perspectives podcast. I'm Adam Turteltaub from the Society of Corporate Compliance Ethics and Healthcare Compliance Association. Joining us today from New York is Alessia Falsarone. Alessia is a non-executive director of Innovate UK. And today we're going to be talking about innovation and most specifically AI. Alessia, thanks for joining us. And to catch the listeners up, you recently shared with me that explainability of AI tools, which is really an issue that's isn't often discussed as much as others, both for audit and compliance functions, is very important. It's something I had never really heard before addressed fully. Can you tell us what it is and why is explainability becoming a regulatory priority?
Yes, thank you so much, Adam. First of all, for having me, and it's a pleasure. I try to connect with you and with our audience today. Well, I have to admit I'd not heard about explainability in AI tools before 2019. And that was because of a trip I had in a regulatory conference I was attending in Singapore. Now, in 2019, the Singapore government released something they called Model AI Governance Framework. And although maybe many professionals, whether in the US or in Europe, have started to wrap their head around governance of AI and AI systems just very recently over the last 2 years. In Singapore, this was something that was already even in government and regulatory plan years earlier. And they didn't just talk about being open, AI being open. They gave a practical guidance on how actually organizations could make AI decisions understandable to both regulators and the users, so regular people. So from there, I have started a lot more in my governance role, really to look at explainability in AI and how that translates today in innovation, both from an investment perspective and how we make use of AI tools in due diligence. So that's an important part and probably something that I wanted our audience to know. Now, when we talk about regulatory priority, there are a lot of, fortunately or unfortunately, real world cases, right, that have shown what can go wrong with just looking at a black box AI approach, which means, for example, what we've seen in the case, I think it was 3 years ago with Apple and the Apple credit card, which was investigated after, women, for example, were reportedly given much lower credit limits than men, despite similar financial backgrounds. And last year also, we had a number of AI-driven robo-advisors that faced backlash in periods of market volatility. So when regulators asked why, the companies involved really struggled to explain not just how they arrived to the decisions, but struggle to explain how the algorithm that they have deployed was stressing one outcome, or I would say in less technical terms, was prioritizing one outcome in the series of decisions to the other. And that's exactly the kind of scenario where I would say explainability isn't just a technical nice to have, it's essential for trust, for fairness, and eventually for legal compliance. So AI is and remains a tool. It does not deliver final decisions because we're not quite there yet. And that's where explainability in everything we do with AI tools, any decisions we made, is so important.
First of all, I just want to say for the record that actually was a siren going by your home. We did add that later to add drama to what you were saying. But I certainly remember that Apple thing and incident. And what was interesting is the credit application didn't ask for gender, but somehow the AI figured out
Yeah.
gender was making decisions. It's I think in some ways there's a lot of need for internal explainability as well. So can you give us an example of what explainability would look like in practice?
Yeah, so in real terms, even if we just look at ensuring that we have a focused approach to explainability that is sector agnostic, first of all, we're really thinking about an AI flag for example, of a transaction or of a specific code in a way associated to a user that is for review. And the ability to actually trace back that decision and see what drove that. In other words, this could and does at present involve tools that generate a summary, not just of the model's logic, but also gives us a dashboard of how factors have influenced that decision case by case. So that is not only left to the documentation that translates technical details into plain language, but is associated over time as the AI tool learn from the data and the experience that the users themselves give them access to. And as their model's logic changes, the user themselves can have back a scan of all the factors that influence that decision. So in other words, it's really about making AI's reasoning visible both for the technical teams and for the frontline compliance staff who may not have a decision or data science background, yet they would understand by looking at this dashboard how certain decisions and factors have influenced the outcome. Now, what is the gold standard in all of this? The gold standard is really simply put that if an internal auditor or a regulator asks, why did this happen? We are in a position where not only we can answer clearly and in understandable terms, but also we can make sense of why did this person get flagged or why was this claim denied. And the answer is far from being that's what the algorithm decided, because in the end, the algorithm is learning along with us. And that's an important aspect that I believe in AI adoption, in particular automation tools that are connected with AI. Sometimes it's easy to forget.
Yes, it is. Now, what are some of the common pitfalls and misconceptions when it comes to explainability?
Well, one of it, Adam, and it's something that I've gone through myself very recently, is assuming that more complex models would always be better. And that could mean models that have more data. So in other words, is more data more experience that we're given to our tool or not? Well, it really depends what the quality of the data that we're giving. So when in fact complexity actually can make explainability much, much harder. Um, Another misconception that I encounter very frequently with non-AI users is thinking explainability is really a tech problem. It's actually a business risk. It is an issue that compliance teams must be involved with from the very beginning. And I see that there's organizations that are relying too much on vendor promises, so to speak, about not just transparency, but also about the validation exercise that may have occurred in delivering that particular application, and how explainable the system really is in their own setting for their own case. And that's why I opened up by saying that when we actually look at the framework in which we adopt AI tools and we define what explainability means for us, it also means looking at sector agnostic tools. So always be aware of the fact that the training set or the use case that one may be reviewing for due diligence may not necessarily be the best one for the particular population, the particular data set that we are exploring, simply because we are operating in the same sector of the economy where somebody else has adopted the same tool. And so I would also say that there's a risk of thinking explainability as compliance teams or audit teams having to look at every technical detail in practice and being able to parse through every technical detail. In reality, you just need the right level of detail for your audience. Even in AI, something that is very known to compliance professionals is that it is a need to know. business, because there are privacy concerns also in all sorts of data that gets fed into training the AI. So I think that's an important misconception to tackle.
Amongst many. Now, and it was funny as you're talking about this and the need to sort of have a log of all the things that are done in news. I keep thinking about, or kept thinking about the whole adage about documenting why you did things in general when it comes to compliance. And in some ways, I see this as an extension of that. Now, finally, can you share some practical examples of how compliance teams can ask the right questions and build the internal policies to, ensure explainability, even if they aren't technical experts?
Yes, I think that's very important. Actually, with your point on documentation, that's actually how AI works. And that's the first thing that I think compliant professionals are better off recognizing, that every tool comes with a rubric. And what is that? Every AI developer knows that it's not just about putting the right prompt or the right series of prompt that leads to um, a particular domain and a particular optimal answer. It is about filling in a rubric that guides the AI decision algorithm around the areas of potential where the potential optimal answer is. And what does that mean? That for vendors, for example, one of the questions that is very important is not necessarily only providing case studies or sample explanations, right, of particular routines, which has become very standard, but internally, I would say that it's never too early to develop policies that require AI tools to have plain language summaries and decision logs. And that would mean asking AI explainability questions front and center. If the AI makes a mistake, how do we identify why it happened? And can, for example, users challenge or override an AI decision? And how does the system record this? Because I see a lot of ways in which users are already currently overriding an AI decision, and maybe they don't see it as overriding the ultimate decisions, but if they override the rubric, then the way the system is recorded is absolutely important. And also, question about explainability, the primary one would be, have we been able to independently test or validate explainability? And can we see step by step how a particular decision was reached and what specific data inputs have actually been used of all the universe of data that the AI has access to make that decision?
I think that's a great example of the virtue of building compliance in from the start, because it shows not only do you get the compliance controls, but you end up with a better outcome because you have a better understanding of what's going on, what the implications are, so that you can address issues both at the start and then on an ongoing basis. Well, Alessia, thank you so much for sharing these insights with us today. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen. I'm Adam Turteltaub from SCCE and HCCA. I hope we're able to expand your compliance perspective.